When did you realize your teacher was koo-koo crazy? My 8th grade teacher became obsessed with the 10-year-old who died in her arms during a school shooting. 2 months later, she staged a fake active shooter drill and forced my classmate to play dead in the same closet where the girl bled out. Then we found out our school counselor was using us for her dissertation on trauma-based learning. After the school shooting at the nearby elementary school, 3 children were shot dead. One of them was 10-year-old Amelia, who bled out in Miss Lee's arms. 2 months later, she became my 8th grade history teacher. At first, she seemed normal, just overly focused on keeping us safe. She locked our door even during class and memorized every parent's face. When the intercom crackled, she'd freeze for a second before continuing. But as winter turned to spring, Miss Lee's protection shifted into something frightening. In place of our usual classes, we had special safety games, where we had to hide in assigned spots around the room as fast as possible. She timed us, saying we needed to beat her old class's record. My spot was the coat closet, which felt too small. But Miss Lee swore it was the safest place. The closet saved someone once, she told me, her eyes looking far away. The games were almost fun until Miss Lee started staring at my friend Isabella during them. Isabella had brown hair and freckles, just like the girl in the newspaper photo. Sometimes Miss Lee would call Isabella Amelia, then look confused. I'd constantly hear her whisper, 22 new chances, while counting us. As more time passed, the more she talked about her old class and how she should have been harder on them when they laughed during drills. We tried to tell ourselves it was just part of her process, but I knew none of this was normal when she interrupted class one day to show us her lock screen. It was a photo of her old class. She pointed to each child and told us their names. When she got to Amelia, she started hysterically sobbing. She could barely speak, but even in that state, she made us memorize where Amelia sat and how she hid. Amelia was quiet, I remember her saying, but not quiet enough. From there, I was forced to watch as Miss Lee descended into madness. I could tell something terrible was coming, but nothing could have prepared me for that Friday in May. Miss Lee's hands shook so badly she dropped her coffee. She checked her phone constantly and whispered, "Next time I'll be better," to Amelia's photo. She made us practice hiding 6 times before 10 a.m., her voice sounding strangled whenever she spoke. "Today you show me you can survive," she said. "Today you prove you're better than my old class." Those were the worst words she had ever said. She unlocked the side door, which was against every school rule. She told us this was our most important drill ever, as she positioned Isabella in the corner, exactly like in the old photos. We had to be perfect or we'd end up in a grave just like Amelia, she warned us. At 10:15 a.m., the hallway exploded with sound. Gunshots echoed off the walls, making my ears ring. Miss Lee screamed, "Hide now, this is real." We scattered to our spots as she'd trained us. I dove into the coat closet with others pressed against me. My heart hammered so hard I thought it would explode. Miss Lee barricaded the door with her desk, showing impossible strength. The room went dark. "Stay quiet," she hissed. "The loud ones die first." A man yelled, "You will pay," in the hallway, getting closer. Kids sobbed, trying to muffle the sound. I felt something wet on the floor. Miss Lee crawled to Isabella and grabbed her roughly. "You're Amelia now," she said, pulling Isabella toward my closet. "You have to be Amelia for me." Isabella tried to resist, but Miss Lee was too strong. She forced Isabella into a specific position on the floor, grabbing her hand and holding it just so. "Say you're scared," Miss Lee demanded. "Say, 'Miss Lee, I'm scared,' just like Amelia did." Isabella sobbed the words, and Miss Lee started crying too. She showed us a horrible photo on her phone. It was a girl covered in blood in a closet. "This is what happens when you're not quiet enough," she said. Amelia learned too late. Finally, the intercom came on, and the principal walked in to announce it was safe. But instead of letting us go, Miss Lee stared, laughing hysterically. "That's what they always say before more shooters come," she yelled. She made us stay hidden for 6 hours. Parents gathered outside, but she said they were fake. When police finally broke in, Miss Lee looked victorious. "I saved them all this time," she exclaimed. Then, with dark eyes and the creepiest smile I'd ever seen, she stared at Isabella and triumphantly said, "I saved you, Amelia." The officers finally got her into the patrol car while she sobbed and pressed her face against the window. And that should have been the end. But it wasn't, because by a stroke of luck, the officers decided to go through her phone. And when we found out who the shooter was, life was never the same again. The police station felt cold, even though it was late May. My parents sat on either side of me while Detective Martinez scrolled through Miss Lee's phone. The other kids from class had already given their statements and gone home, but they kept us longer because I'd been in the closet with Isabella where everything happened. Detective Martinez turned the phone screen toward us. The video showed our classroom from an angle near the ceiling. Miss Lee must have set it up weeks ago. In the footage, she unlocked the side door at exactly 10:14 a.m., then sent a text message. A minute later, the shooter appeared. My stomach dropped when I saw who walked through that door. Mr. Davidson, our school janitor, who always gave us extra cookies at lunch. He wore a black hoodie and carried what looked like a real gun but turned out to be a starter pistol from the track team's equipment room. The video showed him firing blanks in the hallway while Miss Lee orchestrated our terror from inside. My mom gripped my hand tighter as we watched Mr. Davidson follow Miss Lee's texted instructions. Move to the science wing, fire 3 shots, yell the scripted words, wait 5 minutes, return to the janitor's closet. The whole thing had been planned like a twisted play. Detective Martinez explained that Mr. Davidson had lost his daughter in a school shooting 5 years ago. Miss Lee found him at a support group and convinced him this would help prepare kids for the real thing. They practiced after hours when the building was empty. He even helped her install the hidden camera. The evidence was overwhelming. Text messages planning every detail, photos of them meeting at coffee shops, and voice recordings where Miss Lee explained how traumatizing us would save our lives someday, with Mr. Davidson crying and saying he just wanted to prevent another tragedy like his daughter's death. My dad asked if we could leave, but Detective Martinez had more questions. She needed to know exactly what Miss Lee did with Isabella in that closet. I described how she forced Isabella to play Amelia, showed us that horrible photo, and made us stay hidden for 6 hours while parents begged outside. The detective took notes and said they'd need me to testify eventually. My parents exchanged worried looks. I just wanted to go home and forget this ever happened, but I knew it would follow me forever. We left the station as the sun was setting. Other families from our class stood in the parking lot, hugging and crying. Isabella's parents looked destroyed. She hadn't spoken since the incident and would need therapy for years. Several kids had wet themselves during those 6 hours. Others had panic attacks. All because 2 broken adults thought they were helping us. At home, I couldn't eat dinner. The sound of the starter pistol kept echoing in my head. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Miss Lee's face as she forced Isabella to be Amelia. My parents tried to comfort me, but what could they say? My teacher had traumatized us on purpose. The next morning, reporters crowded outside our school. The principal sent emails saying classes were canceled indefinitely. Social workers would be available, security measures would be reviewed, and parents demanded answers about how Miss Lee passed background checks, how nobody noticed her declining mental state, and how Mr. Davidson had access to stage this nightmare. I spent the day in my room scrolling through social media. Everyone was talking about it. Some kids from class posted about their experiences. Others shared photos of Miss Lee from better days when she seemed like a normal teacher. The transformation was terrifying. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. When I opened it, my blood ran cold. It was a photo of me in the coat closet during the fake shooting, taken from Miss Lee's hidden camera. The message read, "You were so brave. Amelia would be proud." I showed my parents immediately. They called Detective Martinez, who said they'd traced the number, but I already knew it had to be someone else involved. Miss Lee was in custody. Mr. Davidson was in jail. Who else knew about the camera? Who else had access to the footage? That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound made me jump. My parents took turns checking on me, but nothing helped. The text message meant someone else was out there. Someone who thought what Miss Lee did was right. The next day, Detective Martinez called with disturbing news. The phone number belonged to Mrs. Sanders, the school counselor who'd been meeting with Miss Lee weekly. She'd been documenting Miss Lee's decline, but never reported it. Instead, she'd encouraged the therapeutic reenactment idea, even helping plan some details. My parents were furious. How many adults had failed us? The detective assured us Mrs. Sanders was being questioned, but I could tell there was more. This was a network of trauma and misguided protection. Over the following days, more connections emerged. The support group where Miss Lee met Mr. Davidson was run by Dr. Hoffman, a psychologist who believed in exposure therapy for preventing school shootings. Several members had conducted similar drills at other schools, though none as extreme as Miss Lee's. The story exploded beyond our town. National news picked it up. The footage from Miss Lee's camera leaked online. I became the face of survival, the kid who hid in the closet where Amelia died. Reporters called constantly until my parents changed our number. Isabella's family moved away to escape the attention. School remained closed. Some parents pulled their kids permanently. The building felt cursed now, tainted by manufactured trauma layered over real tragedy. Detective Martinez visited again with more questions. They'd found journals in Miss Lee's apartment with the detailed plans for escalating the drills. The fake shooting was phase 1. Phase 2 involved fake blood. Phase 3, I didn't want to know. My parents discussed moving, but running felt like letting Miss Lee win. Therapy helped slowly. Dr. Patel specialized in trauma from school violence, both real and simulated. She explained how Miss Lee's own trauma had metastasized, how Mr. Davidson's grief had been weaponized, and how Mrs. Sanders' desire to help had enabled abuse. The legal process dragged on. Miss Lee's attorney claimed insanity. Mr. Davidson pleaded guilty to lesser charges. Mrs. Sanders maintained she'd done nothing illegal. Meanwhile, we tried to heal. 3 months later, they announced school would reopen with new staff, metal detectors, and counselors. Miss Lee's classroom would be converted to storage. I decided to go back, not because I felt safe, but because hiding meant Miss Lee had won. The first day back was surreal. New teachers smiled too brightly. Security guards stood at every corner. In history class, our new teacher, Mr. Williams, avoided any mention of violence. When the intercom crackled, half the class flinched. He pretended not to notice, but I saw his hands shake slightly. Lunch felt different without Mr. Davidson. The new janitor was professionally distant, which was probably better. Trust had become a luxury we couldn't afford. After school, I found myself standing outside Miss Lee's old classroom. The door was locked, windows covered with paper. Somewhere inside was the closet where she'd forced Isabella to be Amelia. Another student, Sarah from my English class, joined me. She'd been under a desk during the drill, close enough to hear Miss Lee's deranged whispers to Isabella. We stood there in silence, acknowledging the space that had changed us forever. The investigation continued to expand. Dr. Hoffman's support group had chapters in 12 states. The FBI got involved. At home, my parents had installed new locks and a security system. not because of any specific threat, but because Miss Lee had taught us that danger could come from trusted sources. Some nights I dreamed about the closet. Sometimes I dreamed I could warn Amelia. Other times I dreamed Miss Lee was still my teacher before the breakdown, when she just double-checked locks and memorized parent faces. The normal worry that became monstrous. Isabella's family sent word that she was improving. They were suing the school district, claiming negligence. Other families joined the lawsuit. The legal battles would continue for years, but I tried to focus on moving forward. The hypervigilance faded, and the flinching at loud noises decreased. Incredibly slowly. I knew the real test would come later. When I had kids of my own, would I trust their teachers? Miss Lee had poisoned more than just our 8th grade year. She'd poisoned our ability to trust those meant to protect us. For now, though, my job was simpler. Survive 8th grade without letting Miss Lee's twisted lesson plan define my future. The car ride home stretched endlessly. My mom kept glancing at me through the rearview mirror. She cut the engine in our driveway, but neither of us moved. Inside, my dad was pacing, talking frantically on his phone about security systems. My younger brother, Jake, sat on the couch, confused. I went to my room and opened my laptop. The news coverage was everywhere. Comment sections overflowed with debates, but none of them understood what it felt like inside that closet. My mom came in and told me that Aunt Victoria, her sister, and a child psychologist was coming to stay. She arrived that night and swept into our house, pulling me into a long hug. She smelled like lavender and coffee. Over her shoulder, I saw my parents exchange relieved looks, thinking she could fix everything. We sat in the living room while I recounted the events again. Aunt Victoria listened without interrupting, occasionally jotting notes. When I finished, she explained that my trauma responses were normal and would fade with time and support. The next morning, I woke to find Aunt Victoria making pancakes in our kitchen. My parents had decided to keep me home from school for the week. Only 5 students had returned to our class. Aunt Victoria suggested a walk. We made it 2 blocks before running into Mrs. Patterson, whose daughter Emily was in my class. She hugged me tightly and whispered that Emily hadn't left her room since Friday. Back home, I found Jake in my room, reading news articles about the incident. His eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and fascination. He asked if it was really as scary as everyone said. I couldn't find words to explain. Aunt Victoria set up a makeshift office in our guest room and started seeing some of my classmates whose parents brought them over for informal sessions. Detective Martinez called to schedule a follow-up interview at our house. It was exhausting. She asked about every minute detail of those 6 hours. Afterward, I overheard my parents arguing. My dad wanted to pursue legal action. My mom worried about putting me through a court battle. Aunt Victoria mediated, suggesting they focus on my recovery first. That evening, Isabella's mom called. Isabella had finally started talking, but only to ask about me. She wanted to know if I was okay, if I blamed her. I told her mom to tell Isabella that none of it was her fault. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by dreams of closets getting smaller. The next day, Sarah from English class stood on our porch with her mom. We sat in my backyard while our moms talked inside. Sarah revealed something that made my blood run cold. She'd overheard Miss Lee on the phone during lunch the day before the incident, arguing with someone, insisting that Friday was the perfect day. Sarah also remembered seeing her meet with a woman with short dark hair in the parking lot after school. They'd been arguing intensely. I grabbed my phone and scrolled through the school's staff directory. Sarah gasped and pointed at one photo. Mrs. Sanders, the counselor. She was the woman from the parking lot. My hands shook as I showed Aunt Victoria. She called my parents in and they contacted Detective Martinez, who said she'd already been investigating Mrs. Sanders' involvement. But this was new information. The detective arrived within an hour and took detailed statements from both Sarah and me. She revealed that Mrs. Sanders had been released after initial questioning due to a lack of evidence. But these secret meetings suggested deeper involvement. That night, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. My chest tightened, but this one was from a classmate named Marcus. He'd seen Mrs. Sanders at the grocery store that afternoon, talking on her phone and looking agitated. He'd overheard her mention my name and something about keeping quiet. My dad immediately called Detective Martinez again. She thanked us and said they'd increased patrols near our house. We visited Isabella at a quiet cafe downtown. She looked smaller than I remembered. Her voice was barely a whisper as she described her nightmares. She kept reliving being forced to play Amelia. She'd researched the real Amelia online, found her obituary. The resemblance was undeniable. Then, Isabella revealed something she hadn't told anyone else. Miss Lee had whispered something to her during those 6 hours. Something about making sure she knew the plan worked. The conversation was interrupted when Isabella's mom's phone rang. Her face went pale as she listened. She ended the call and urgently whispered to my mom. Mrs. Sanders had been spotted parked outside Isabella's house that morning. We left the cafe immediately. Isabella's family was going to stay with relatives out of town. The casual meetup had transformed into a flight from danger. At home, Detective Martinez was already in our driveway. She'd received a photo of Mrs. Sanders' car. The investigation had revealed that Mrs. Sanders had access to all student records, including home addresses. She knew where we all lived. That evening, our new history teacher, Mr. Williams, called. He'd found printed emails hidden in Miss Lee's old classroom, discussions between Miss Lee and someone using a coded address. The messages discussed preparation protocols and necessary trauma exposure, with the sender encouraging Miss Lee's escalating plans. It sounded like Mrs. Sanders. Detective Martinez took the emails as evidence. The next day, Mrs. Sanders must have sensed the walls closing in because she showed up at our house. Through the peephole, I saw her standing there, looking perfectly normal. My heart raced as I backed away. Aunt Victoria called 911 while my mom kept me away from windows. Mrs. Sanders rang the bell again, then knocked, calling out that she just wanted to talk. Police arrived within minutes, followed by Detective Martinez. Without a warrant, they could only ask her to leave. She complied, but not before looking directly at our window where I was watching. The next morning brought a breakthrough. The cybercrimes unit had traced the coded emails to Mrs. Sanders' personal laptop. Combined with witness statements, they finally had enough for an arrest warrant. She was taken into custody at her apartment, where detectives found journals documenting her research. She'd been using Miss Lee as a test subject, manipulating her grief to create a real-world experiment. We had all been unwitting participants in her twisted study. The news hit our community hard. A support group formed for affected families. Through the group, I learned other kids had received the anonymous messages, all sent from burner phones purchased by Mrs. Sanders. She'd been monitoring our reactions for her research. The full scope became clear. Mrs. Sanders had identified Miss Lee at the grief support group, spent months convincing her that traumatic preparation was necessary, and fed her paranoia and guilt over Amelia's death. The legal proceedings began. Mrs. Sanders was charged with multiple counts of child endangerment and conspiracy. Miss Lee's lawyer argued she was a victim too. School reopened with extensive new protocols. Our class, once 22 students, now had only 15. I decided to return after 2 weeks at home. Isabella returned the same day. We gravitated toward each other, bound by shared trauma. Just sitting together at lunch, pretending to be normal teenagers, was its own form of therapy. Summer break arrived. My parents enrolled me in a day camp where nobody knew my story. The first morning, I froze when they announced an emergency drill. A girl named Tori noticed my reaction and quietly moved closer, offering silent support. One afternoon, Detective Martinez called. Mrs. Sanders' lawyer was pushing for a plea deal. My dad's jaw clenched. Jake had started having nightmares, too. Our whole family was learning that violence ripples outward. Isabella's family returned briefly. She'd been getting hang-up calls at their new number, breathing on the line before it went dead. I started getting them, too, always from payphones. Then, a sabotage campaign began. Sarah was questioned about being disruptive at a school interview. Marcus lost his spot in advanced math because someone told the school he was too distracted. Someone was trying to dismantle our futures. Detective Martinez investigated, but hit dead ends. One day, Mr. Williams called again. While organizing summer school materials, he'd found a USB drive taped under Miss Lee's desk drawer. It contained videos of our drills, but more importantly, it showed Mrs. Sanders directing Miss Lee on camera angles and student positioning. In one video, she explicitly discussed using us as test subjects for her dissertation. We finally had undeniable proof. Mrs. Sanders' plea deal evaporated. She now faced serious charges. The harassment stopped abruptly. As summer waned, I chose to stay at our school. Sarah, Marcus, and Isabella did too. We formed a pact to face ninth grade together. The trial date approached. Inside the courtroom, Mrs. Sanders sat perfectly composed. The banality of evil, Aunt Victoria had called it. When my turn came to testify, Isabella, Sarah, and Marcus were in the gallery, giving me strength. But the USB videos spoke louder than any cross-examination. The jury saw her directing Miss Lee, treating us like lab rats. The verdict came after 3 days, guilty on all counts. Mrs. Sanders' composed mask finally cracked. As they led her away, she stared at us with something like betrayal. Miss Lee's trial was different. She was found guilty, but with a recommendation for psychiatric treatment. Mr. Davidson was already serving 2 years, his testimony having helped convict the others. With the trials over, we tried to find our new normal. Dr. Patel, our new guidance counselor, started a peer support program. We turned our trauma into something useful. By October, the nightmares had mostly stopped. The 1-year anniversary was marked by a private gathering in the park. Healing happened in these quiet moments. As sophomore year progressed, the incident became part of our history, not our identity. Graduation day arrived. As I walked across the stage, I thought about Amelia, wondering if she'd be proud that we'd survived what others had twisted from her tragedy. The summer before college stretched ahead. I decided on psychology, hoping to understand. Isabella was heading to art school. The night before leaving for college, I stood in my empty bedroom. The motion sensor lights still blazed outside, but I no longer checked them obsessively. At college, I gave my new roommate the simplified version of my story. She accepted it. The first emergency drill sent my heart racing, but I breathed through it. October brought news that Dr. Hoffman's network had been dismantled. I joined the campus peer counseling program, my experience becoming a tool. Thanksgiving brought our first real reunion. The survivors' lunch table reconvened. We'd all changed, grown, but the bond remained. Second semester, I wrote a paper on institutional betrayal, using our story with clinical detachment. The A+ felt like vindication. As freshman year ended, I packed my dorm room. The drive home felt different. I wasn't fleeing to safety or returning to trauma. I was simply going home. That summer, I worked at a day camp, helping scared children through the drills. Full circle. The night before returning to school for my sophomore year, our support group held its final official meeting. Dr. Patel declared us graduated. As I packed my car, I found Mr. Davidson's letter. After 2 years, I finally wrote back. Not forgiveness, but an acknowledgement of shared manipulation. Another small closure. As I unpacked in my new apartment, I hung Isabella's painting of opening closets, a reminder of where I'd been and how far I'd come. That evening, I sat on my balcony watching the sunset. My phone buzzed with messages from the survivors group chat. Pictures of new dorm rooms, updates on majors, normal college kid stuff. As darkness fell, I noticed I hadn't checked the locks once. I thought about the girl I'd been in that coat closet, terrified. I wished I could tell her she'd be okay. My roommate called me inside for movie night. I closed the balcony door and joined my friends. No checking locks, no scanning for danger. Just a normal night in my normal life. Finally. Beautifully normal.
Thanks for watching. If you got this far, leave a comment, like if you liked it, and follow for more.